Welcome to the shop. I'm Jared and this is Wrench Every Day. And behind me is one of my favorite trucks in the fleet. It's my 1971 International Harvester 1010D Johnny Reb edition that we have renamed Johnny Rev. If you're not familiar with this project, this truck started off with an International 345, was then swapped to an International 392, and then that was all taken out and the entire front suspension from a Corvette C5 was fitted with the help of my friend Randy and the guys at GRC Fabrication. Once we had that in there, we decided to put an LS engine in the original mounting location on the Corvette. That means the engine is 13 inches back, 8 inches down, and technically makes it a mid-engine truck. There's a lot of arguments because the engine still lives in this general area, but the center mass is behind the ball joints, the center line of the front suspension, so it is mid-engine. And it had been a very reliable truck other than a questionable fuel gauge, sometimes leaving you stranded. I usually always kept 5 gallons in the back just in case. I had some friends decide to borrow it and not use it.
Push you, I guess, aim for the hash marks.
It turns out if the guy normally travels with gas in the back of the truck, you probably should keep it in there because obviously the fuel gauge isn't reliable. But other than that, the truck has been absolutely amazing. If we ignore the fact a wheel bearing failed and I lost a whole rear axle, that's a whole nother story. What got us to this point, well, it wasn't a questionable choice. It was just stupid. For whatever reason, there may have been some outside influences. I decided to drive a lowered truck with a very low engine, with a very low air filter, into some somewhat deep water at some speed, and engines don't run on water very well, and we broke it really well. So in today's episode, we get to take a lot of adventures. First, we get to figure out how serviceable we made this truck. With an engine that far back, it's gonna be easy to get out, right? So we get to learn how serviceable that is. We're going to swap everything over and get a new engine ready to go back into it with an upgraded camshaft. So we're gonna go over a little bit about camshafts, what they do, and have a good visual representation for you. And we're gonna discuss hydraulic properties and how fluid, well, it can't be compressed. And when you put fluid in an area that needs to compress, what happens? It's not good. So let's get a closer look at the truck and then get wrenching. Now there have been quite a few comments about this truck asking when we're going to paint it. We're not. I love the look of it. I know some people love fully restored vehicles. I don't. This is such kind of a cool patina. Eventually I'm going to get better wheels for it because these are just mostly round and work for now. We've got those big AP Racing calipers up front and big rotors, which really confuse some people. But what makes it fun and special, excuse me, it's kind of tricky to open a hood. There we go. Is that way down there. I mean, it doesn't look like it has an engine at all. So down there is a 6-liter LQ4. The guys at J&J provided all the parts when we were first putting Johnny together. And they actually have been really awesome and helped me out with that replacement. So again, this is a Corvette C5 accessory set. It is a Corvette C5 subframe. We built those custom upper control arm mounts and shock mount, and it works amazing. This thing is so much fun. We took it on that Dustball GT, and before the wheel bearing failure, we're flying in this truck. People were kind of nervous for us at how quick we were driving. So some of the things I'm curious about on the servicing side is that intake sits way back. Obviously, we'll get that intake yanked off for the engine removal because we haven't lift plate. And I've been trying to decide, do we go out the bottom or try to lift it up and out the top? And I'm leaning towards the top, which is a little tricky on a Corvette setup because of how close your balancer is to the steering rack. So I don't know. We'll go ahead and get a bunch of stuff disconnected, ready to go, the accessories dropped off of it, and then make that final plan out the bottom, up the top, what we're going to do with it. And again, as we go along, I'll just show you some of the other really cool things we did, if you're not familiar with this truck, because we did build it quite a while ago on the channel, and it's been reliable. Right up until the point I broke it. Well, things just got a little complicated. I knew we were leaking oil, but I never quite identified the hole in the block. I just was kind of waiting, and I decided I wanted to pull the heads and look from the top down, which required me to lift the truck and unbolt the manifolds. And that's where I found the damage. If we look straight up, those familiar with an LS know that starter should be pointed straight in, right? Not kicked out at an angle. And if we look there, we can see the block kicked out with a piece of that oil pan. So I might have to track down a Batwing oil pan. I think I can repair it, but I've got to get it apart. Derek, let me know if you want your pond mud back, because I got it right there. So, what I was hoping would be kind of quick and easy is, of course, turning into something slightly complicated. So, I'm going to drop that starter off, get this lower pan off the dust shield, and drop our exhaust and kind of see what we're playing with. All right, we have got an engine out of Johnny. I do not know if we can get one back in the same way with cylinder heads. We've ended up a little bit tight right there. So while we have the engine out, I may cut some of that sheet metal out and rebuild the firewall to give us a little bit more clearance. Who would have thought making a mid-engine well-handling truck would come with some complications? But we have an engine over here, and our oil pan did take some damage, the bat wing oil pan, but other than a little file and an ear, I think we're okay here. Because despite that absolute carnage, this piece is not unique. The oil pickup is, but I think we're gonna be okay. So I've got to do a little bit of cleanup and yeah, get ready to tear down another engine. But we are gonna jump right now to a slightly cooler and cleaner Jared, who's going to demonstrate a little bit of what hydrolock is and why water getting into the cylinders is such a catastrophic event that my case was avoidable. Sometimes if you lift ahead under super high performance, you get water in. There's multiple ways that water potentially can get into a combustion chamber, and we're gonna talk about why that is such a bad thing and why it gets expensive quick. All right, as you can tell, we are sitting behind something with wood on it. That means we are about to talk a little technical. We're gonna dive into, like I was talking about, a little bit on camshafts and why we made the decision to upgrade the cam in the new engine going back into Johnny. The best way to imagine an engine is that it's an air pump. That's all it is an air pump. There's fancy things that help it pump air, but its job is to move air through the intake, compress it, and then back out of the exhaust, just like an air compressor would, but instead of a tool, you're adding fuel and creating an explosion. So the way you're able to make more horsepower or just power efficiently is improving its ability to move air into the engine. Now, the way the engine gets air into the combustion chamber where things are compressed and explosions happen are through these valves. Now, the valves on themselves just stay closed all the time. They're not able to do anything useful without the help of the camshaft. Some of them are below the cylinder head in the block. Modern cars, most every modern car, has the camshaft sitting on top of the valves in the cylinder heads. So all of the camshafts we have in front of us, they're for either a big block GM 454 engine or an LS engine, so they're all cam under. So that means there is a lifter that would ride on the cam lobe going to a push rod to a rocker arm, which then would open the valves to let the air in and out. So in a camshaft, you have your positions where the bearings will ride, where they sit and are supported by the engine or in the cylinder head. And then you have cam lobes. This is where your lifters and rockers are going to live and transfer the motion and profile of your camshaft into opening energy to let air in or out. Now, when you look at a cam lobe, it kind of looks like an egg. It has a ramp that's leading up to its peak lift or opened amount and then gently coming back off of it. Now, there is a tremendous amount of science that applies somewhat differently to each engine, and whether it's forced induction, nitrous, there's so much that goes into it. So this is intended to be an overview to help you understand the terms, but you'll want to work with an experienced engine builder for your application to make sure you get the right cam. Really, the two things that we're going to get into and cover a little bit more in detail is what's called valve overlap, and just kind of a cool way to identify the duration over 50. It's basically once the cam has moved the valve 50 thousandths of an inch, how long it stays open until it's closing and hits that 50 thousandths of an inch again. Now with overlap, that's what kind of ends up giving you that really cool idle chopping sound. And the reason you run into that is your intake valve is opening to start bringing in that fresh air while the exhaust valve is still open, pushing the dirty air out. The reason you do that, at least especially on a naturally aspirated engine, is as RPM increases, those events are happening so fast, you need to have that overlap to make sure enough air is able to exchange. And in doing that, you do end up with a fair amount of your intake charge going out the exhaust, but overall, you'll gain a lot more horsepower in that situation. The reason you don't see it a lot in OEM applications is you're taking a fuel-charged mixture and sending it right out the exhaust. That is not good for the environment, and that's why they tend to be race use only when you get these big, huge, choppy camshafts. Now what you'll see in a turbo camshaft or a supercharged camshaft is that overlap gets a lot narrower because you now have forced induction. You have a pressurized intake charge forcing air in. So if you kept that exhaust valve open too long, that air is going to go out really fast right through the exhaust, and you can actually end up in a turbocharged car having uncontrollable boost pressure, because as the boost is going into the engine, that creates more exhaust, which is being shot straight through, and it's spinning that turbo faster and faster, and in turn, as that happens, you can overrun a wastegate, and it becomes this vicious cycle of overboosting. Another thing you'll see commonly in the valve duration and the lift over 50 shapes is on a big blower cam or turbocharged cam, they tend to be very aggressive ramps with just a sudden huge peak and a drop off real quick, because again, you're trying to get that air in, let it combust, get it out really quickly. So we'll do kind of a quick close-up of a stock LQ4 cam, a turbo cam for a LS, and then one of the most extreme lobes I've ever seen. This is Earl's blower cam, where there's almost no ramp. It's just on off, and it's gonna sound absurd and amazing in the car. Now, I've said it before, I don't wanna get too deep into the woods on explaining all of the finite details. There are some other engine builders that are way better at explaining it. You've got Engine Masters, David Freiberger goes into a lot of detail. I just thought it'd be cool to take a couple minutes, just a crash course on the super basics, and then show you some of these lobe shapes so you kind of understand what is opening and closing your valve, why it might be happening, and how that works. All right, let's talk about hydrolocking. It's a term you've probably heard. You might understand that it's bad, and if you do it as good as I did, you blow up an engine. So hydrolocking is the principle or concept when water enters an area that has to compress. Water doesn't. It's a fluid. Fluids do not compress, and it will physically stop the rotation of an engine, hydrolocking it, hydraulic locking. And when that happens, something ends up having to give. And in Johnny's case, it was 2 wrist pins, and the connecting rods then flailed around and broke, and it was bad. I have 2 cylinder heads here. One is the LS AFR head that we have to go into the drag race Lexus project against PFI speed. And next to it is a big block head. This is Earl's cylinder head. Originally, Earl was just gonna get some cast iron peanut port heads, and then things got out of control, and these beauty Inconel valves. We'll talk a lot more about this when it's time to build the big block, but I have them here to kind of show combustion volume and talk a little bit about that space where water's going in, where water shouldn't go in. It's very bad if it does. But if you look in here, you have valve reliefs and your combustion chamber volume. This is measured generally in cc's. You'll hear 72 cc's, 62. That is referring to the amount of liquid that will fill this space. So I can't remember exactly. Let's say this is a 72 cc head. You would think, hey, I can fit 72 cc's of water in there, right? No, because you also will have a piston, and this is a domed piston with valve reliefs, and when it comes up, it goes this way, it closes almost all that area off. So now you only have like 10 cc's. So it's very easy to run out of space when you have a fluid that doesn't compress. So to try to help visualize that, I put together a little science demonstration. We have a 20 milliliter syringe connected to another 20 milliliter syringe, where right now with no fluid in it, we can put both of the pushers in, and we can actually push them a fair amount, and you can see we're still able to push in, and then they'll rebound out slightly. And that's because the air inside is compressing. So again, we press, and then I can let go, and they rebound out. So this is how your engine will normally be working. There's room for the air, it compresses, explodes, pushes down. Water won't do that. Let me put some water in this. We're being extra fancy, bottled water for our demonstration. We will now try not to make too much of a mess, and you'll see we still have some air in there, so we'll get some compression, but it does not move very well. And if you push hard enough, you break your hose, or your connecting rod and leak. So I don't know if this helps you. I thought it'd be really cool to kind of show that, you know, the hydraulic principles a little bit of the science experiments that you maybe have done in the past, equal and opposites, and there's a whole lot that goes into this. But again, Johnny's connecting rod, that was him there. Too much pressure and it breaks because that fluid does not compress at all, ever. Hopefully that helped you visualize a little bit and get a better understanding of what we're going up against when we're driving lowered trucks in the pond, which you shouldn't do. You need a snorkel if you're gonna go into some deep water. But let's get back to working and get the truck fixed so we can go driving and avoid the ponds.
Why is it does not matter how much you drain an engine, it's going to leak all over your floor and make a mess. So we're making good progress on getting the new 6-liter LS ready to go back into Johnny. We've got a new camshaft in it, we've got it timed, and we have the Corvette pickup in it, which was going to be a little tricky because these are baffles or windage trays, and they have slight modifications depending on the type of oil pan that's on it, and this had a truck oil pan. Well, we're going with the Corvette oil pan, and to make it easy, we would, just use this if it wasn't for the fact I absolutely destroyed it. And if you see, there's a big indent right there to allow this foot to sit down nice and flush. You don't need that big of an indent. What you're actually able to do is I came in with my punch and just clearanced it just enough so this will sit down nice, flat, it's secure, and you turn your engine over and make sure there's no interference, that you didn't bend it too much, and your crank or rod is now going to smack into it. Now on the camshaft, you'll notice the engine's upside down. Most people tell you you have to remove the cylinder heads to do a cam on an LS. That is not the case. The main thing you need to watch for are your lifters falling down the bore. So if you're out of the car, real easy thing to do, pull your push rods, flip it upside down. Or pull your push rods if you're doing it in car, and you get a pencil magnet, 16 of them, and you put it down your push rod hole and lift your lifters up to keep them from dropping out, and then you can change your camshaft nice and easy. So we've got our stage 2 kind of ultimate truck cam for stock converter, stock valve springs in there to give Johnny even more attitude. Next up is cleaning the oil pan and front cover. That's a little grody, and hello connecting rod, hello piston, hello piston, hello piston. Hey look, it's a wrist pin and some of our block. It broke really bad. Wait, is that 2 connecting rods? I thought it was just 1. Oh no, we got them both. We've got 2 variable position pistons in there. So I'm not sure if any of you were planning it, but don't put gallons of water through your intake. It's not good for your engine. Water doesn't compress, it just breaks stuff. All right, let's get you caught up because as you can tell, the engine bay looks a little different. We are ready to attempt a first start. Now, anytime you are starting an LS or really any returnless style fuel system, something I highly recommend is key cycle several times and open this bleeder Schrader valve. Let all of that trapped air get out, otherwise you are going to crank and crank and crank until the injectors have opened enough to let that air come out. And as we talked about earlier in the video, air compresses, fuel doesn't, liquids don't, so it really creates a problem trying to get a good clean first start. So we've got that done. One thing I am very worried about is as we were pressing the power steering pulley back on with the correct tool, the internal thread stripped out, which meant I couldn't do that and we had to use a hammer. And that pump is now very tight to turn by hand, so I'm thinking we're gonna have to replace it, but we're forging right ahead. We're gonna start it. Also, I got some help. That's James. Don't worry about him. We introduce him in a later episode. So he's here helping out with a couple things. So, you think it starts?
It's gonna start.
It's an LS. You take out of a junkyard, you make 800 horsepower.
Why wouldn't it start?
Now, for oil, I used the Valvoline Extended Protection. Some of you may ask, why didn't I put racing oil in it, right? Why didn't we do the VR1?
Well, it's a daily driver. It's not a race car.
Exactly. Despite what everyone on Craigslist says, just because it has a camshaft, this is not a built LS. It's an LS with a camshaft.
LS with a cam.
So the Valvoline Extended Protection was a perfect fit for it because it does get driven a lot. So you're saying 100% it starts, right?
I'm saying 99.9% it starts.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will let you turn the key and I'll stand out here and scream if something goes horribly wrong. Like, I didn't get the engine in time, or
flying built.
It's an LKQ reman, so make sure it's in park. Oh. You hear that power steering pulley? Yeah? So, again, that's why you bleed the fuel system. There may be one or two little things, an injector off, wire off, or maybe it's just that big of a cam now. Oh, she's starting to smooth up a little bit. Anything leaking?
I don't see any leaks. Everything's looking good.
Yeah, that pulley pump does not sound happy. It's just groaning. You're going to behave enough. It does have a bit of a cam, but it could be a slight misfire. So we'll let it warm up. We'll keep an eye on it. So we're out driving Johnny, and it's gone incredibly well. We do have that power steering pump noise that we expected it to have, and we figured the proper way to test drive a new truck is a burnout. So we haven't been able to, but the new cam is working well. I really need to tune it to optimize it, but we're just kind of cruising, and it cruises nice, and then we can just drop it, and it pulls pretty good. And then, of course, we got the big old brakes to slow us down. So, what do you think, James?
I think it does a lot better than International ever intended.
Just a little bit. This thing is so much fun. And he is back, and turns out all of my grip and braking modifications make burnouts a little bit of a challenge for it. That's okay. I'd rather a truck that grips and flies through the corners quickly and is a ton of fun to drive than one that just does big smoky burnouts. So we'll get the burnouts coming back again later. We are going to definitely keep him out of, it was shallow water, but out of water. We're not going to run through any puddles, so I can just enjoy driving this truck. It is so much fun. James riding along. We just had a blast blasting around North Georgia. This thing it drives so much better than a truck that looks like this ever should. So I'm going to throw the hood on here off camera, get a new power steering pump that hopefully I can correctly drive the pulley on and doesn't damage it. But I appreciate you guys hanging out. We had a fun time of getting Johnny back together. A little bit of a science lesson on basically how fluids do not compress and why I blew up a kind of expensive engine. I was dumb. Also, we talked a little bit about how camshafts work and the benefit of putting that bigger one in this engine, and I can feel it even before tuning on the road. So I'm just thrilled. It's good to have it back on the road, just in time for the Denali to come back from the body shop and for me to finish a ute. So I went from nothing with a truck bed to having 3 truck beds all over again. Perfect timing, right? But anyway, hope you guys have a wonderful day. I appreciate you, as always, hanging out with us here in the shop. I'm Jared, reminding you to always make questionable choices and don't drive your sports trucks through water, deep water. It's a bad idea. See ya.